Welcome to Painted by Quarterly Slush Pile. We take more time than other editorial boards, but we stand behind our methodology, so much so that we're going to share our process with you through this podcast. Welcome to the editorial table. We're in a very different space and time right now. For those of you who are loyal listeners, you'll know that Marion Wren has been with us rather than in Abu Dhabi. And she's with us again today. And we are not in our little audio booth, our little recording studio, but we are in fact in a cinder block meeting room in the hallowed halls of McAllister at Drexel University. So that's a little unusual, but I'm still me, Kathleen Volkmiller, director of the graduate program in publishing, writer of memoir and creative nonfiction, and co-editor of the Painted by Quarterly. And Marion Wren is right here on my left.
And I love being within tickling distance of Kathleen Volkmiller, cinder block room, be damned. I am Marion Wren. I am the co-editor of Painted by Quarterly. I write essays, creative nonfiction, and academic work about writing programs and writing training during the Cold War. I also run the NYU Abu Dhabi writing program, where I'll be returning next week.
I am Tim Fitz, and I'm a writing instructor here at Drexel University and the Curtis Institute of Music. And I write mostly short stories, but also novels.
Woohoo!
And I am Caitlin McLaughlin. I'm the Digital Communications Co-op for Drexel Publishing Group. I've been reading for PBQ for about close to 9 months now. I said 6 months before, but it's actually closer to 9, I'm realizing.
So much time has gone by.
Yeah. And I'm an English major at Drexel, so that's that.
Okay, and we have one remote editor with us, Jason Schneiderman.
Hello, I am Jason Schneiderman. I am associate editor at Painted by Quarterly. I am the author of 3 books of poems and 1 anthology. And I have actually, I was about to say I'm an associate professor of English at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, but that promotion actually doesn't go into effect for another 22 days. So I am still, as we record this, an assistant professor.
Absolutely.
Well done. Well done, you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we have 3 poems today by 3 separate poets, and each one was submitted to a different issue. So I think we're having another first. We love to have first. Let's see if we can keep that going, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Always have a first. So that's our first for us. And just remember that you can go to pbq.drexel.edu and find the corresponding poems that we'll be talking about. If you'd like to read along, read ahead, read after, any of those things, read aloud right with us. Speaking of reading aloud, who would like to read the first poem of today? Hilary Jacqmin's Private Lives.
I'll read it. This is Marion, and it's Hilary Jacqmin. And I love the spelling of her last name, and I'm going to spell it because I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. Jacqmin. And the poem is called Private Lives. They have retired to Lost Pines and burger time. When our tan Malibu grinds up the switchback to their mock Tahitian village in the Texas hills, the grandparents can barely stand to touch us. But little David, they cry out until my father blushes. Kindness is cold champagne coops at 5 and 6 o'clock, then Jeopardy. A walk through bull pine, clearing brush. Whatever can be done with us. My sister's fist is purpling with cactus spines. My mother's stomach bites. This week, I will not bathe. The grandparents shy from our commotion. Secretly, we flip through The Handmaid's Tale. Our shared air mattress crackles like a seed. We're trapped. Now that we've come, they won't let us go out past the dry creek bed. Next year, they'll never even leave the house. Why is their clubhouse impermeable, a miniature pentagon? And why can't we order malteds at Lock Drug? Mother says we can't ask why. Inside, we play endless Rummikub. Uno. There ought to be a religion for people who don't know what to believe, grandmother frets, her bad eye winking like a cut-up moon. Outside, a loop of fire ants works a burnt-out stump, persistent as pump jacks, and night's an oil field. We are too young to know what Granddad did with catalytic crackers at Shell, too dumb to talk duplicate bridge hands, gravity's rainbow, or split stock. But we think hard about the hard wood in the Lockhart smokehouse and how Granddad's bread machine vibrates like a gravitron. Sometimes they notice me. They say, "What are you writing? Are you writing about us?" They say, "That makes me so nervous." I want to tell them there is so little that I can write, almost nothing. Perfume like propane, a tickless clock, how quickly they both turn away.
Ooh, great reading.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks for reading.
That poem is a delight to read.
Yeah.
The way it sort of leads image to image, and it's a long, skinny thing.
Yeah. So I know our listeners are going to go and look. It's practically 3-word lines and 3-line stanzas, really, really tight and skinny.
And that's really hard to do because I mean, when you're writing, you can't just shape the line to the phrase. You have to shape the phrase to the line, and kind of maintaining that consistency of short phrasing is a really difficult thing to accomplish.
Yeah.
I'm reminded when this is many, many years ago when we were early as PBQ editors, we used to sit at Teresa Leo's apartment in Center City, Philadelphia. I think it was Old City somewhere. It was a really cool apartment. Anyway, we were completely broke and didn't have enough money for Xerox copy machine stuff. So we would hold up poems that were submitted to us and sort of share them around the room from afar so we could all see what they look like on the page.
See what they look like.
Before we, discuss them. So it's a long, skinny thing.
Yeah. But what I think also works is the word I just used, the tightness of it. Even though it's so long, it's not rambling. It doesn't meander. It's so every little chunk is another tight description of something. And I am absolutely with these kids at this grandparents' house and seeing everything that they do. I mean, and it's this straight up description, but then so many lines are so beautiful. My sister's fist is purpling with cactus spines.
Mm-hmm.
My father blushes, kindness is cold, champagne coops, right? Our shared air mattress crackles like a seed. I just love all of these turns of phrase as she describes this life.
I love that you just corrected a reading too, right? So kindness is cold is the third line of a stanza. And then there's a stanza break. And then the next line is champagne coops at 5 and 6 o'clock, then Jeopardy a walk, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And from when I was reading it, it was like kindness is cold. And like that stanza break made me stay so long just on that premise that kindness is cold.
Right.
But then you get the delivery of these drinks, right? It's called champagne coops. That's what kindness is.
What's a coupe?
Oh, listen, I learned that the hard way, and this is without Googling it, right? I think it's a glass of champagne, right? It's the French way of saying a glass of champagne. And I learned that the hard way because I was in Paris when I was in my early 20s and asked for champagne and wound up with cognac and didn't have enough French to explain that champagne. And the waitress was like, "You order a champagne coupe." And I'm like, "And I'm a jacket. Give me that." But I was so broke, I couldn't get the thing I wanted. So I wound up drinking whiskey, cognac, brown liquor of some sort in the beginning of the end.
Well, cognac is good. I mean, learning to drink brandy is not the worst thing in the world. But yeah, no, I just have like, okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
You know what? I thought about this, but never, when I looked at this poem in preparation for this, the champagne, even if it's cheap Andre champagne, doesn't fit with the rest of this family's lifestyle, but I kind of extra love it for that. Like there's something ritualistic, champagne coupes at 5 and 6, then Jeopardy. Like all of these things are rituals that must be done. 1 glass at 5, 1 glass at 6, then we watch Jeopardy.
So they don't feel like they want to kill themselves.
You cannot get a Malton.
And everything else is so uncomfortable. And that's like the one moment of comfort.
Yeah.
But of course, they don't get to partake because they're children.
Right. The kids.
Right. The one gesture towards kind of high living that's made in this entire landscape is one that excludes the children who are continuously bored.
Yes.
And secretly dipping into the Handmaid's Tale, right, for their teenage jollies.
Right. Someone was just on Facebook discussing how the Handmaid's Tale continues to seem as prescient as ever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's just great moments through the whole thing, and it's just tight and descriptive.
I like that kind of the children's view of everything too. So like the bread machine vibrates like a gravitron. The gravitron's very, separated from the rest of these descriptions. It's something like you'd imagine at a fair for the kids. And then we have that mixed with the bread machine. I really like that.
Yeah. And I think that the gravitron, it makes me think that I had a moment last night in Target where reminds me of this moment where I was trying to look for a boombox, and I realized there were really aren't any more boom boxes anywhere.
Yeah.
They want like these like high tech boxes or whatever where you put USBs in or Bluetooth and everything.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I found myself like going up in the aisle like where are the boom boxes? No more boom boxes. And I think, oh my gosh, I'm a crazy old man now. And
how quickly it happened.
Yeah. And when I read this, I realized that items and devices are things that mark generation gaps. And so like when I have a boombox in my house and my kids' friends come over, they think, wow, her dad's weird. He's got this big thing that he plays music instead of this other thing that all the normal people use.
I had a guest student read to my class, and he referenced Teddy Ruxpin, and I was like, they have no idea what you're talking about. Like, they have no idea what Teddy Ruxpin is.
Okay, yeah. I think you just came up with the title for this episode, the Teddy Ruxpin episode. But I actually want to come back to the poem for a moment, because I think Tim's point about like time and the duration of time links in with what could actually be read as a potential problem with the poem. This is a skinny poem, but it's like 3.5 pages long. Like this is a long description, and it's a long description of not a bunch of exciting stuff, right? Like this is a really sort of careful study of the tedium of being stuck in an old folks' home as a pair of kids. And what I think it does really elegantly is represent that tedium, but without boring the reader. And that is hard to do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Agreed. It's the pathetic fallacy, right? If you're writing about boredom, you can't be boring.
Exactly. Which students love to do, right? They write incoherently and say, the guy's on mushrooms.
It was always it's Bill Clinton with the balloons.
Yeah.
I just like the rhyme. I'm sorry, guys.
Go.
I like the rhyming too. I really like how it's not obvious. So like the inside we play, endless room a cube, uno, which the uno rhymes with who don't know. I really like that. It just flows off the tongue.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look for this.
Yeah. These strange grandparents.
I hear the hammering, you guys.
Yeah, so Drexel's undergoing some construction.
We're ignoring it, Jason. Don't talk about it.
Sorry.
So
I'm trying to open a bottle of cognac.
It's a haunting.
Think about the timeless call.
So I think maybe the last thing I would like to bring to the table on this poem too is the title. So it's called Private Lives. And for like the longest little while, I was like, wait, why is this called Private Lives? Why isn't it called like the old folks' home, which would be a sucky title? But the fact that it's called Private Lives and then ends up with that image of the grandparents finally paying attention, right? It's sort of like looming over the speaker's shoulder and being nervous about being rendered and then turning away is devastating, right? So it really sort of like lands on its point, right? In that last stanza. So I admire that move too.
Well, I like the fact that this is what is the private lives of the grandparents. This is what they don't want them to know or to write about, but there's not really much going on there to hide.
Yeah, right. They're not allowed to know what grandpa
move
did.
towards the writing. Yeah.
Yeah, they're too young to know what grandpa did for a living. Like these grandparents are very dried up, can barely stand to touch us, but this is the obligatory visit. Yeah, I'm grooving. I think we're ready to vote.
I do too.
Agreed.
Okay.
Maybe we should bang on the table like the pipes. Maybe that should be the way we vote. No,
Or not.
Kathy's frowning. All right, and we vote.
1, 2, 3, shoot. All right. And we're waiting for a remote unanimous.
No, I remotely voted.
Go, Hilary.
Yeah.
All right, private live.
I have to bring up something that our listeners won't be able to see. Maybe we can take a photo of it. Jason,
Yeah.
these champagne coupes are so inexplicable that this family would drink them, right?
Right.
Marion Wren is wearing a bracelet that's made out of beer tabs.
I am wearing a bracelet.
Okay,
Are you really? Like the old-fashioned kind that you like pull off the like.
Yes,
It's beer
yes, what people made when you were like in 8th grade.
Yeah, I love it. It's stretchy and it's full of beer. Wait, and do you notice the earrings are
I
also
did.
made of aluminum cans?
I didn't realize the
So
earrings
I love repurposed technology so hard.
were.
have decked
The
myself in
bracelet is just so not what I would ever
Yeah.
imagine on your body.
Honestly, I thought you were going to talk about the champagne coupe because the champagne coupe, point of reference, you know how champagne glasses, they're the tall flutes? Well, the champagne coupe is like, it's like a
The
little,
older style
It's
one.
the older style, which
Yeah.
I think the rumor was.
Or the
it's
woman would
perfect-
take a bath, Jason. You know what we mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Burlesque dancer takes a bath. But the point of that sheet was it's meant to be the perfect boob size. Like if your boob fit in a champagne coupe, it was like the perfect boob size. This was a thing that I once heard. But maybe somebody was just trying to make me feel better.
And now our listeners need no photos at all.
And
That's
up
really
next.
great. Wait, now I have to talk about my father and Martini.
Yes,
I do have to do this because this is something that everyone should live by. If you remember nothing else from these podcasts, martinis are just like breasts. 1's not enough. 3 is too many. Thank you. And scene.
Anne Boleyn disagrees.
Words of wisdom from my papa. And there's no way to segue into the next poem. Well, maybe
Well, actually,
a little
well,
bit.
I'm going to point out that if that is true of martinis and boobs, it is also true of testicles.
True.
It is. See,
You could say the same thing. Martinis are just like testicles.
All right.
Okay, then. Next up, we have a poem that was submitted for the Monsters issue. It's by Keith Woodruff, and it's called The Bride of Frankenstein Blues.
I'll read this one.
Okay.
Bride of Frankenstein Blues. Consider the moon, my friend, how its absence conjures this unromantic air. Here in the bar, smoke unwinds like bolts of slow lightning across the gauzy light. Everywhere you look, mouths, small dark graves, chew on drinks. Now, the music gropes its way through the crowd, looking for phone numbers, drags itself onto the wooden dance floor. This is no night for finding brides. Still, you try, touch her wrist during talk, and spring the classic recoil. Her black eyes twitch like nerves, the head cocks bird-like, spindly arms jerk back from your touch and clasp up her breast sacs as the goose hiss splits her blue lips. These damn castles are cold. Some nights, alone again, arms outstretched on the stairs, you think you might prefer the murderous torches. Anything to light you up.
Nicely read.
Nicely done. So,
Can we just start by saying breast sack? Like, what a perfect segue.
There was a segue. And there's alcohol being consumed.
Right.
So we know what we're doing. We meant that all along. We meant that.
That was our plan.
Uh-huh. I've always had a huge heart for Frankenstein, so I might be easily schmoozed. But Frankenstein the monster has always killed me.
Frankenstein's monster.
Right. Well, I said Frankenstein the monster because we think of it as both ways. And
I guess when Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, you reach you're past any kind of Mary Shelley insistence
Now,
on
I'm talking about the Mary Shelley. I used to teach Frankenstein over and over and over again, and I loved it every time, and I loved to watch my students fall in love. And so anyway, that is all saying, like, I almost might not even be objective because I have so much empathy for him. But to defend the poem of its own merit and not just making use of a character we all know and already have our own relationships with.
Mm-hmm.
The exact moment that has already been referenced, her black eyes twitch like nerves, the head cocks bird-like, spindly arms jerk back from your touch and clasp up the breast sacs as the goose hiss splits her blue lips.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's that.
So the other thing too is this is coming to us specifically for our monsters issue. And, you know, we've been reading quite a bit of monster poetry and thinking about what monstrous means and what monstrosity is. And I'm reminded of Toni Barnstone and Michelle Mitchell-Faust, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, have a recent anthology out called Monster Verse. And there's a whole section in the first part of the book about Bride of Frankenstein poems, right? So she figures in this poetic imagination, this poetic refiguring in the poems in that anthology. So I was delighted to see one in the Slush Pile for PBQ. And I do dig the Bride of Frankenstein blues because the scene that's set, right? Like Frankenstein's in a bar and trying to make moves on the Bride of Frankenstein, and the perpetual regression of that. Like it's never going to be, it's never going to come to fruition. And that is heartbreaking,
right.
and beautifully rendered.
Mm-hmm.
And he really, the author really captures that tone to touch her wrist during talk, the breast sacs, just this kind of English, but it's not the English that we know. It's not really like what we use. So it's very monstrous in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I taught a class last year and we read an essay called The Loss of Death and how modern medicine is going to be able to solve everything. And we talked about being a 48 in one of our editorial meetings and downloading consciousness and all that stuff, eternal life on earth. And this poem makes me think about how awful that would be. Thinking about how out of touch I am in the Target buying a boombox. Imagine 2,000 years from now, trying to talk to somebody, trying to pick somebody up, and then having everybody looking at me horrified. It's bad enough being a man in his 40s. Imagine being a 2,046-year-old man.
Yeah. Right. Made of dead body parts.
And I mean, it's similar to the poem we just read about, as far as because with kids, that's what it feels like. I don't want to jump back too far, but being bored at your grandparents' old folks' home seems like eternity.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is it here. This is just continues on for real eternity. So I like that. I like this commentary on the things that are happening.
Well, I
love the way it sort of picks up on the that whole kind of thing about what were they called? Pickup artists, right? With the steps that you're supposed to follow in order to seduce a woman at a bar.
Yeah.
Right.
Touching the wrist during the talk, but it doesn't work. Every time he does something, he's met with revulsion no matter what he does.
Right.
I was going to say the same thing. Maybe I'm a killjoy. So me reading this first, I was like, wow, I wonder what the Bride of Frankenstein's thinking, this creep who's trying to get her number all the time, trying to touch her wrist, but she just does not want him. But then thinking about it, I like how it brings it back into Frankenstein's point of view, he's doing all these things that are perceived as creepy by women and not succeeding.
I worked with this guy at the Holiday Inn Gainesville in 1990. And he used to tell me, we were banquet waiters and we were wearing dirty tuck suits and black pants. And he had this nervous twitch, and he was really short, and he would get right up under my chin when he talked to me. And he'd tell me he'd say man, I got 7 digits last night. I got 7 phone numbers last night. And I kept thinking, I paid $40 to talk to those girls. Hear their side of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Are we ready to vote?
I think so.
I think so.
All right.
All right. So here in the cement block room, we say 1, 2, 3, vote. And Jason remotely comes in, and it's another unanimous yes.
Go Monsters. Go Monsters. And Keith Woodruff. Thank you,
Bonus
Keith Woodruff.
episode. And Hilary Jacqmin, so it's 2 for 2. 2 separate issues, have 2 beautiful poems now. And finally, we have one for the locals issue. This is by Kierstin Bridger, and it's a prose block. And I guess I'll read it.
All right, Kathleen.
To the girl from the reformatory town. You wrestled against the clutches of brothers and cousins, etched lessons in your muscle, broke tendencies, rerouted synapse with unwritten chapters entitled Risk, Pain, and Tolerance. Though pale and tender as your own, you clawed your way into their flesh, red scratches and waning moons of bruise. You carved a language of ferocious prey and warning, but more startling than the DNA that curled from under your nails was the power which made you surge, the breathless current of survival that ran like a lightning rod through the center of your axis as you spun in and out of years, knowing blood tracks would either catch up with you or become abandoned to faster byways and untranslatable modes. So you walk, never looking over your shoulder, one step in front of the other, past the fermenting bumper crop yard fruit. Never mind the dirty shoelace untied, the frayed gray string dangling over the trestle bridge track. You need this grip of heat, the hot rail under your feet. It's like the static warmth the addicts wear like skull caps, the choke cherry buzz after needle pierce and plunge. Keep your hair blown back, baby, and charge with the horizon line. Ignore the periphery of prison men in orange. Their 40-ounce cans and spent shells are their business, not yours. Disregard the jackrabbit carcass and its fur, which still clings but will sail away soon like dandelion seeds. Remember, it's not a charm, and their sentence is not your sentence. You can't do that kind of time. Keep going. Never say, it'll all blow over someday, because lies like that scatter, fade, sink back to soil. They'll transform into fragments so sparse, so swallow-drunk. The next generation will skip the deciphering stone, misspell the story of you, digitize and archive it on some pixelated and odorless.com.
Well read.
Yeah, seriously, Kathleen. I'm really hung up on the beauty and the sound and the rhythm of those first 3 sentences, right? In this prose block. Really beautiful.
Really, I can only call those opening lines aggressive, and I mean it in the best way. You're just, it's like a deluge of really intense things to think about and be transported into.
So, okay, so the you, the second person addressed, the person being addressed has wrestled, has clawed and carved, right? And a path out of this reformatory town, right? We're all in agreement on that, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got this second pattern of surging and energy, right? And buzzing static that becomes a motif in the poem. And this is, I guess, a question, right? For all of us to think about. She's walking along train tracks for that escape, and the tracks are taking her out of town. Is that what's happening? Is that the warmth of the static underfoot?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
It was just kind of where she goes. Yeah, I mean, to get away from town, but not to escape permanently. Sort of more in a, just kind of this is a place to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, as if she's preparing in the future that she's going to get out of this town, but for right now, she's not. For right now, she's just at this place.
What's interesting to me is, I think most people I knew growing up, you feel like you're going to do something when you grow up. You're going to transcend your normal experience. You're going to be something great in life, and then look back where you came from. And this person is coming from the reformatory town and just wants to be normal. They want to get to that bottom rung. They just don't want to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
They just, I think it's really interesting to see that sort of pattern going on.
Yeah. And that's like, keep your hair blown back, baby, and charged with the horizon line. Right. And so that buzzing and the charging and the surging is connected to that vision forward, that line on the horizon, trying to anticipate this stuff receding.
That last line is really my favorite too. The next generation will skip the deciphering stone, misspell the story of you, digitize and archive it on some pixelated and odorless.com. The idea that if she does mess up, if she does become like the rest of the people in this town, it's going to follow her forever online.
Yeah, another eternity poem.
Right. Yeah.
I was also thinking about after Ellis Island digitized all of their records, we were able to find my grandfather's entry into the country.
Oh, wow.
And it's sort of like weird, but there is, there's just this endless record of everyone who came in. And you really only look if you're looking for something, like either you're looking for a relative or you're doing some kind of research. But yeah, it was fascinating that you sort of just turn into these like weird data points that may or may not be rediscovered.
And people around my age, like I've been online since I was like 12. So I have records on Facebook all the way back. So I'm thinking this person probably has records of their not so finer moments online, and everybody in my generation does. So it's this fear that people are going to look at you in the past and it's going to follow you forever.
Yeah. And it's funny, the three poems are so different, three different poets, three different issues. And here we are with another sort of generational poem, right? So like the charge in the poem is to disregard, right? These prison men, right, in orange, disregard their bullets, their bottles, their urges, and the corruption of that, right? And to keep your eye on something else, because it needs to dissipate, like it needs to derail, and she needs to go.
Yeah. The middle is just so gorgeous with that. She might even be talking to herself, right?
Yeah.
This grip of heat, the hot rail under your feet. It's like the static warmth the addicts wear like skull caps. The choke cherry buzz after needle pierce and plunge. It's where she goes to get her shit together, right? Keep your hair blown back, baby, and charged with the horizon line. She's always looking out, even as she's stuck there right now. It's very dense and intense, and I think it fits its form beautifully.
It also fits the tone or that energy feeling when you pass a prison, or when you see a prison on the horizon. You get that. We passed one the other night. We're driving through Jersey, and we took this side road, and there was a prison.
Wow.
And the car just kind of went silent. You can make a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old be quiet for 5 minutes.
Right.
To see one, you just...
Yeah, they're in timeout for a long time.
And to remember, it's not a charm, and their sentence is not your sentence. So even living in this town, seeing these people in prison every single day, she has to remind herself that they aren't her and she won't become them.
Yeah.
Right. That would be a scary way to grow up, right? To always... I even think about that when traveling in Florida and in Texas, where they have more chain gang type of situations. That, those guys on the side of the road working. I've always thought that's more of a deterrent than anything else. I can't imagine, to always see those prisoners. Sure.
But I think it's also kind of like a black hole. It could, in some ways, it deters people, and in other ways, it has this negative effect where it feels like we were talking about Ouija boards. You stand too close to it and bad stuff happens.
Right. Which seems to be her headspace, right? Because she's there, she can get sucked in easily.
Doesn't the research suggest that it doesn't deter you at all? It just sort of horrifies. The death penalty certainly doesn't deter people, because people who are committing death penalty offenses aren't thinking about it when they're doing it.
Right.
So
and the more educated you are, the less likely you are to actually shoot someone with a gun.
Wow. I was looking at Caitlin when she was speaking a moment ago, and she was like sort of making a gesture, like, you know, a kind of like us and them, or myself and someone else, right? Like that sort of gesture. And it sort of connects up with what you're talking about, like deterrence and being part of a context like this. But I think one of the strengths of this poem too is this pattern of images. One pattern is about this sort of like tightly bound, surging energy. Like she's like a lightning rod, right?
Yeah.
That energy. And then it's counterposed with this disintegration stuff, right? Like the jackrabbit carcass is going to disintegrate. The image of her is going to transform, right? It's going to turn into fragments, or the background's going to recede into particles, right? So those are really like two patterns of images that are really in contradiction to each other and work beautifully to get at this urgency, right? Like a real sense of urgency.
Or like the sentence is not your sentence, but she's also thinking the sentence is my sentence, but I don't want it to. So she's constantly fighting between those two thought processes.
I usually don't like poems that are written in the second person. I usually find it kind of like an odd device. And here I thought it worked really well.
I think we're ready to vote.
All right.
Shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, vote.
Wow.
Do we have a champagne cork? Champagne cork. We 3 out of 3, all unanimous yeses. That could be a first as well.
Yeah, and 3 for different issues.
Right.
So Kierstin Bridger's poem is the locals issue.
Right.
We have 1 for monsters and 1 for the untamed issue. That's really great.
Yeah,
really great.
So amazing. Okay, we don't have a lot of time to discuss this, but I really feel the need to bring this up. So when we wrote Kierstin Bridger, the last person, for that poem to ask her permission to discuss it here, she said, sure, yeah, you know, probably a lot of stuff everybody says. I'm terrified, but fabulous. But here's the revision that I wrote since I've submitted to you. And we looked at the revision, and it simply wasn't as strong for us as the original. So it made us all think about that, like how frequently, and I'd say it's easily 1 out of 6 pieces we accept. The author will write, thank you, yeehaw, but here's my revision. And I would say easily 90% of the time, if not even a scooch higher than that, we prefer the original. So let's discuss this phenomenon of authors in some vein, in some way, feeling good about the work. They have to, I'd hope, before they submit. And we must agree, yes, this is good work because we're saying yes. But then they continue to muck around with it and revise and revise. Is it simply that none of us are ever satisfied with our work and you know?
Well, I want to jump in on this and say that if I remember correctly, the piece that Kierstin sent us, the second piece, was such a radical revision. It was almost a different poem. Right. So what we looked at here was a prose poem. It's a prose block. The thing that she gave us at the second go had line breaks and stanza breaks. I want to remember that that's the case. Maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but I remember it being so vastly
It was very different. I remember Marian went so far as to say this is a new poem. I don't know if I would have said this is a new poem.
Yeah, but I make that
but it was that different.
It really felt like a new poem to me, and which is why I sort of wanted to insist on looking at the first poem, which is to say that I don't necessarily remember it not being as good as this poem, right? It was just so different from the poem, and it felt like the initial contrast was with this one, and this is what, you know, the labor of the editorial board had gone into this one, and I wanted to acknowledge that too, right? So that's my 2 cents.
Right. But just this week, we were chatting before we started recording. The same thing happened where we accepted a poem, contacted the author. They said, here's the revision. And the revision was so different that we simply aren't interested in that revision. Like we would say no to that revision while we said yes to the original. So what's up with that? What's up with poets continuing to play with their writing? Not just poets, all authors.
I mean, I think it's because revisions often look like new poems because the poem's intent, the poet is working to communicate a vision. right? The poet kind of has an emotional experience that they're trying to create for the reader. And so how you go about that is going to be really radically different depending on kind of where you are in that writing and rewriting process. And then as the reader who's kind of receiving that, it doesn't necessarily, it's just a very, very different relationship to the piece.
Well, I think when you look back on your writing, oftentimes, well, I know I do this. If I find a piece that I've written maybe a few weeks ago, I'll go back to it. And sometimes I'll even rewrite the entire thing with the same idea. I don't know if other people do that, but for me, I think maybe that's what they're getting at, unless that's just me and I hate my work and rewrite it all the time. I don't know.
I think commonly people start off abstract. They know what they're writing about. And the first few drafts, they make it clear to the writer what they're trying to say, but then they, after a number of drafts, they focus it and they get it to that sweet spot. But then their nature is just to keep writing and fixing, and then you just overcook it. And you need a good editor, a good confidant, or a reader, somebody. And I do this all the time. Someone will say, "Hey, your last draft is better. Stop. You're just interfering."
Let's even talk about something smaller. How frequently we try to not make many revision suggestions, right? We either accept a piece as it comes or we do not accept it. But on occasion, we'll ask for revisions. How frequently is let's lop off that last stanza? Right. It even goes that way too, right? Not only is it rewriting the revisions that we get, but people didn't realize they were done. And they wrote another 2 paragraphs or stanzas or whatever it is, right? You guys remember the film 6 Degrees of Separation?
Based on the play by John Guare.
Oh, Schneiderman. And Donald Sutherland is an art collector, and he visits a kindergarten class, and he's enamored of the work. He's just staring at the work with his mouth agape. And he says to the instructor, to the kindergarten teacher, "How do you get them to create work like this?" And she said, "I know when to take it away." And that's, I'm haunted by that phrase for all the years of when 6 Degrees came out. And I think about it a lot in this life as an editor.
So that's what we're suggesting, that we all cultivate our inner Donald.
Well, no, I was once in. I remember once we were friends.
If we check the degrees, we're all related to him. Well, it wasn't him, that kindergarten teacher. We have to channel the kindergarten teacher and know when to take it away, or have friends help us, or have editors help us. I mean, honestly, too, we could say nobody has demanded the revision get in instead. No one has become married instead to the revision. They always go, "Oh, okay then." Take that original. So anyhow, I guess the word for the listeners is, feel good about your work when you send it out, and then maybe leave it alone.
Well, and I think, like the worst thing is when
unless you get rejected.
You're not attached to it anymore. Like you publish something and you're like, "Oh yeah, I don't like that. And I don't want to direct people to the work anymore because that's not what I'm trying to do." And so that's also like another kind of side of that.
Yeah, if you change your mind and you don't like it anymore, just withdraw it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but Jason, that's never happened. That's what I mean. Nobody has said, not only have they not demanded the revision, they've never said, "I hate that now." No.
I'm thinking of this was many, many years ago, and not related to Painted Bride, but a friend of mine in my graduate program, who I knew was a poet, I called him and I was like, "Hey, you might want to change your name because there's someone publishing fiction under your name." Using the same, I mean, not like it's just, you should be aware that someone else has a name. And it's a common name. And he was like, "Oh, that was me. Tell no one, get rid of that anthology." and he just completely disowned the work that was in that. He said he was totally embarrassed by the story. He's sorry that he let them take it. And so, I mean, that's a kind of other, side of what happens when, the work grows and changes as you do.
Right. Yeah. Right. And then a flip of that, or another facet of that too, is just process-oriented approach that we're tracking here, which is, the poems evolve, the work evolves, and going from being published in a literary magazine to getting a book contract or winning a prize and getting a manuscript together, what went in the literary magazine might actually change in the book, right? Even though you're acknowledging its original publication. And that's up to that's on the author. The author makes that decision. But it's this first rank of interaction with the editors and the authors that we're fascinated by, right? Like
right.
when we catch an author in between drafts, and find ourselves liking the first draft.
Right.
Yeah.
In Tobias Wolff's greatest hits collection that came out like 10 years ago or so,
yeah.
in his foreword, he writes how he had changed stories even for that new book. Old stories are published in books, which it's an interesting subject. When is the final version the final version?
Right. Well, I guess it speaks to the very first thing we said. People just are never satisfied with their work, right? Yeah. Or can be. So anyway, no way to segue out of that, but we have to wrap it up and say thank you for such a terrific episode to our poets. 3 out of 3, all unanimous, fabulous. I guess I have to know when to stop this podcast.
Thank you, Kierstin. Thank you, Keith.
So go to pbq.drexel.edu, poke around on our site, sign up for our email list. We do not inundate you 2-3 times a month. If you send us a self-addressed stamped envelope, we'll send you a podcast sticker. Tell us what you think about this episode on our Facebook event page that relates to this episode, and keep on reading. Thank you. Woo.
This podcast is produced through a joint venture of Drexel University's Office of Information Resources and Technology and the Painted Bride Quarterly magazine. This podcast is the property of Painted Bride Quarterly magazine. All rights reserved.